Hey, welcome everyone to the next session of our signature back office solution series of LinkedIn Live sessions covering staffing success, strategies for building a thriving staffing business. I'm Don Palmer. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Signature, and we're joined today by Josh Kirkham. Hi Josh. He's the founding sales leader of Quill. And Josh has worked throughout his career hands-on with hundreds of recruiting firms, from solo operators to large teams, helping them streamline their workflow by using artificial intelligence tools. Thank you, Josh, for joining us today. How about we start by you sharing a bit with us about Quill and what Quill is all about?
Yeah, absolutely, Don. And it's a pleasure to be here today. As Don mentioned, my name's Josh Kirkham. I was our founding sales leader, now scaling the team up to be our VP of revenue here as well. A little high level on Quill. Background story is that we know that teams are never consistent at updating a lot of their admin work. It doesn't matter whether you're in staffing, recruiting, sales, whatever that is. People who tend to be great at customer facing roles are not always that stellar at making sure we're tracking everything back inside of our ATS. And so what it is that Quill does is that we're the number one AI note-taking tool built specifically for recruiting firms, helping to do things like take notes on calls for you that we can customize not only to the type of call that you're doing, but based on the context you'd like to see. We'll automatically update your ATS like Top Echelon, Loxo, Bullhorn, and others right when that call is done, updating notes, custom fields, and even creating the first draft of your write-ups. From the teams using Quill today, they're finding they're saving an average of 8 hours per recruiter per week by using Quill to automate their admin work for them.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that intro. One of the things I really wanted to kick off today with, I'm very interested in your thoughts, some opening thoughts about the real world environment that
Mhm.
recruiting firms are having to operate in today. There's so many different forces at work, artificial intelligence, of course, being one of those. What are
Yeah.
some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a couple of big things that we're seeing from like a macro perspective that's obviously impacting recruiting today, whether that's market fluctuations, things that are changing inside of the world, just around how the world is doing trade together. Obviously, AI is a big part of that too. And especially as businesses continue to mature as we're getting later into the 2020s, like the big thing that we know is that there's speed and specialization that teams are trying to focus on, as well as just increase pressure to increase our margins, right? And so I think the big thing that we're seeing is that while there's a lot of uncertainty in the market today around what is it going to look like in the next year, what do trade agreements look like, not only within a country, but across countries, we're hearing this crazy thing called AI that's coming in that everyone's like, we know that we have to use this in some way, but there's 10 bajillion, which is a very real number, by the way, 10 bajillion different ways that teams are trying to think about using AI. And so I think the big, very exciting thing is that there's so much out there in the world that we can do to improve our businesses, to keep up with the changing technological order that we're in today. But there's obviously a lot of uncertainty in terms of what should we do first. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that we're having conversations on with our clients today around when we're thinking about AI, change management, how to increase the profitability of our business. What are some ways that we can do this at scale? I've always been a really big believer, Don, that it's simple, not easy. There's so many things that you can do. It doesn't mean it's easy to do, but how do we start to put some of those layers in to make sure we're actually increasing the efficiency of our business as we're continuing to scale?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's a nice setup for what are some priority actions that recruiting firms can take to leverage automation.
Mhm.
Uh, Specifically, I'm thinking about the front end of their
Yeah.
processes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of ways that I've seen teams, especially from a front end system, like find ways to automate, right? And whether that's the simplest one, offshoring, which I know is obviously a really big thing that you do on your side as well, Don, because that's going to have such a margin impact right at the start. Finding teams that can not only work the hours you need to work, but maybe even work other hours that you're looking at on your side as well, whether you're looking at different time zones, things like that too. Other really simple ones that we've heard teams leverage incredibly well are actually automating a lot of outreach, right? Whether that's using systems like HeyReach or Instantly, which can automate LinkedIn outreach, connecting with people, sending them messages to start driving demand for your side. Instantly being a pretty sweet automation emailing tool to do that. There's a lot of really cool ways on the front end, not only that we can scale through tools and technology, But I know offshoring is probably one of the biggest ways, even internally here at Quill, that we're looking to find ways to benefit our margins, especially when we're looking around some of those fixed costs.
Okay. All right. All right. Maybe shifting gears a little bit is let's talk about the stuff that no one teaches you when you start your own firm. The back end of things, compliance, workers' comp, payroll, funding, multi-state hiring. What are your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that's going on, especially around fundraising, making sure you can just keep your business running in general, finding ways to make sure that you're paying the teams in general too. And I mean, even from what we're doing, I've personally never been a recruiter. I've done it as a sales leader a lot of times, but it's a totally different ballgame, especially when we're looking at it from the staffing side of things, when we're actually managing the payroll going through as well, not only for our clients, but maybe even just as a recruiting firm in general, our own team's payroll on that side too. And so I think the really big things that I know we like to think about a lot as a business, but that I know a lot of recruiting teams are looking at too, is that what are some other ways that we can start to scale our time and make sure we're bringing team members in that can actually start to do some of more of that low leverage work a lot easier as well. And so one of the really big things that I know we think about, we have a lot of our clients think about too, are what are those super high priority, high leverage activities that we need to make sure maybe that's somebody like myself is spending our time doing? And what are some of those other roles that we might be able to start to look to offshore, which can actually have that huge boost to our margins, making sure we're keeping proficient in what we're doing on a day-to-day standpoint too. So there's a lot of really cool, interesting ways that teams can use a lot of the systems, especially from a back-end side when we're thinking about payroll, making sure that we're keeping cogs down, things like that too, to make sure we're actually able to scale very sustainably too as well.
And then I'll go ahead and tout. This is where Signature can be a great partner for a recruiting firm. Taking care of all those back office headaches, timesheet collection, invoicing. Getting payments collected, handling all that from an operational standpoint, but also marrying that together, if you will, with the payroll funding and Signature funds gross profit advances as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, let's shift back gears toward your thoughts about maybe how you can innovatively combine these two things. Automation of the front end, outsourcing, bringing those two things together in a
Mhm.
powerful way for your firm.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the simplest ways that I've seen a lot of teams scale really quickly, right? Where maybe that's actually finding somebody that is offshored that can actually start running a lot of that campaign for you. And so the one big thing that I know we've spoken to a lot of businesses about in general, even just spoken to a lot of firms about too, when we're thinking about finding ways to scale, we should always make sure that we're actually scaling in an appropriate way. And I know this is where a lot of teams start to get hung up, is they're like, I know I need to find other ways to maybe scale my outreach so I can actually increase the business development work I'm doing, because that's the top of funnel, biggest, hardest thing that we have to do as a team generally. The first thing that I always recommend is we got to do that on our own. As leaders, as VPs, as executives, the first stage of scaling is you getting your hands dirty, learning as much as you can, and starting the process. Because it's impossible, as we know, to hire somebody to do that job, especially in a very cost effective manner, if we need them to be the expert in that role. It's probably one of the biggest things that I see a lot of teams not always understand from like an order of operations standpoint when we're actually looking to scale originally. The first thing I always recommend, especially if you're looking to do this in a very scalable, cost efficient way, make sure we're the ones who are actually taking on that first layer of building the system. So maybe again, if we're looking at a front office side, so maybe that's more outreach, business development work, things like that too, do some research and find what are some really easy scalable tools that we can use to actually start to push more of that business development work. I know I mentioned too earlier through HeyReach or Instantly, right? There's an email automation tool that you have basically 5-10 emails that could be sent a day from one inbox, and they give you access to tens of thousands of emails to make sure that we're staying out of spam filters, deliverability stays high, and all that great stuff as well. HeyReach is another one that I've heard a lot of teams use, but there's again 10,000 different tools that do similar things, more from like a LinkedIn outreach side of things that'll automate connects that you're doing online, initial outreach to that individual too. And then you can have somebody that manages an inbox. Once we have some of those initial systems down, it makes it a lot easier that one, we know exactly what we're looking for in that role that we're looking to automate. We can teach them what we need them to do. And it helps us scale, because as we're looking through those scaling pieces, especially bringing new people in, my opinion's always been You either hire somebody who has a lot of expertise in that, which usually we have to pay them a lot of money to build that system out from the ground up, or we can take the time to learn some of the initial things around how should we be, again, maybe looking at the front end side, scaling our outreach to help with business development work, putting some of those early grounding blocks in place so we can see what does good look like, how should this scale, what could targets be for that person too. We can show them what good looks like, get them to show us that they understand how to do it. And that allows us to scale as a founders, leaders, and executives at the team, because instead of us having to be in that day to day, Don's my scaled person helping to actually scale what we're doing from business development side. I've showed Don what good looks like. He shows me he knows how to replicate that. Then it's more so just weekly meetings looking through how are we trending to our KPIs, what are adjustments we need to make, and how can we continue to double down on some of those efforts. And so I think a really big thing, especially when you're thinking about scaling efficiently, is really start to see, do you know enough that you can actually start that progress, put that foundation in, start to see success, then hire somebody to teach them to do the job? Or do we need to actually just go hire an expert who knows how to actually do that role for us, especially when we're looking to scale?
So I'm thinking just a mind experiment here. I'm a recruiting firm owner. I've taken steps to do some automation on the front end. I've taken steps to do some outsourcing on the back end. Can you give me an example of what a recruiting week can look like when we put these kind of systems and processes in place?
Yeah. I think even just keeping it really simple, Don, if we're thinking about how a funnel typically works, especially in recruiting, which I think is, especially coming from a B2B tech sales background, where it's usually 50% of the pipeline we're getting on a monthly basis comes inbound to us. I know that's not always a reality, especially for our recruiting friends, right? We're outbound trying to find new clients to recruit for. Then we're outbound trying to find great candidates most times to recruit for as well. That would probably end up being, even through your experience, Don, what 70 to 90% of our weekly time spent doing business development activities. And so if we know that that's a very high leverage task that has huge impacts to how our business starts to operate, the easiest way that I can see this potentially scaling is that if we know that when we're trying to actually get in contact with somebody, we want to make sure we're using all channels we have available to us, right? So that's going to be social through something like LinkedIn, email, and then something like a calling system as well. What a scaled program like this can actually start to do is that once we have a system that we know is repeatable, we're seeing success with it, we can offshore to bring somebody in to help keep that managed and keep growing and scaling that productivity. Because once you have that initial foundation down, it's typically adding more contacts to your outreach that you can actually reach out to them every single week. So it's just credits, building lists, things like that. And then just replying to those people, which are two very time consuming tasks. But in this hypothetical world that we're chatting through, since we had those initial layers already built, I brought Don in, who's my outsourced worker, who can actually start to scale that work. I could potentially cut my business development time down from 70 to 80%, maybe to 20 to 30%, because it's more check-in meetings, checking our dashboards to see what's happening. And I just need to make sure that I'm spending the time on the phones every day, actually calling those lists that we're actually reaching out to through those other channels, just to make sure that we can continue to scale and maximize what we're doing too. And so it's probably one of the simplest methods that not only we've seen a lot of success in here at Quill, but I've even spoken to a lot of firms who've seen great success with it, that they can start to use a mix of automation, outsourcing, just to help buy back their time so they can actually start to scale in those really high leverage task areas.
Yeah. More calls, more meetings, more touch points.
Yeah.
It all ends up with the result of more placements. And that's
Yeah.
what the business is all about, right? Is solving problems for our clients by finding them the people that they need.
Right.
You shared a saying with me. I don't know if you remember this, but you talked about, you called it a key mindset shift. If it's repeatable, delegate it to technology. And really all of this is all about, that we're talking about, is improving productivity. And that's going to drive greater results. Well, I think we're getting closer to the end of our time together. I wonder, do you have any takeaways or final thoughts that you'd like to share with us today, Josh?
I think some of the biggest things to constantly be thinking about that I would really challenge a lot of the people listening to this call on is that when we're finding bottlenecks inside of our business, it's always within our control how we can actually scale it. Sometimes we do have to think outside of the box. Sometimes change is difficult and hard. But we're seeing that in the era that we're in today, automation is more prevalent than ever before. I think one of the craziest things that I like to think about, Don, is that if you look at the way the world operated even 100 to 150 years ago, 60% of the workforce worked in agriculture, farming, doing a lot of that type of work. That makes up, depending on the country you live in, usually 6 to 8% of the workforce today. So there's been such a dramatic shift that we saw through the Industrial Revolution around how we can actually start to scale and automate things from like a global perspective. We're in this next really interesting phase shift as we're looking at AI getting put into place as well. The biggest thing that I would really challenge listeners to when you're thinking about AI, it should be a system that we can start to use to automate a lot of the manual tasks that we're doing today. And don't think about AI as a binary tool, whether it works or it doesn't work. It's a spectrum, just like everything else in life. How much can this start to automate for me? Because even looking at a very simple business development example, say that we're spending out of our 40-hour week, 80% of that time, so 28 to 30 hours a week, just building lists, reaching out to people and calling somebody.
Yeah.
If you could even get 80% of that 80% back, so you're actually only needing to spend 5 to 6 hours a week doing that same work to get the same output, not even an increased output. How much more leverage does that give you as a business owner? What other focus and task can you actually start to spend your time on? I know another really simple one, even looking at what Quill can do. Most teams are saving 8 hours a week with Quill by automating back-end admin work. So things like notes after calls, updating your ATS and write-ups there as well. That's an entire day a week that you can start to buy back just by automating some of this work. And so I think the big things that I've always been a big believer in is finding what is that major bottleneck that you're finding in your business that you're finding is slowing you down and maybe stopping the progression you're looking to make. Start to think through, how can I actually start to scale it? And the way I've always been a big believer in is looking at more, better, new. So can I just do more of the same input that I'm putting in to get a bigger output? Like scaling emails, outreach, things like that to get that same result? Can I improve the messaging that I'm actually using to get to that same result? Or can I bring something else in new? If we're thinking about it from like a note-taking and an admin perspective, yes, you could always have somebody else sit on a call with you, take those notes and put them in, but it's just another fixed cost that we're having to look in as well. And we're still not getting that time benefit. And so the big interesting piece that we're in today are, what are those simple skills that we can start to automate using technology, bringing somebody else in to manage that task for us? And what are systems that we can just fully take off our plate so we can just keep focusing our time on those very high leverage tasks? Because that's actually what's going to scale our business in the most productive way.
Yeah, thank you for that. You prompted a lot of thoughts, and my wheels were turning as I was listening to you, Josh, as I look at what's going on with AI and just the tremendous productivity improvement potential. I've been a business professional long enough that I can remember tools that we take for granted today for our productivity: word processing tools, Excel, spreadsheet tools like Excel, email. None of these things existed when I first started working as a business professional. And I've seen in my career that productivity to this day, we all still achieve with those kind of tools. I believe AI could blow away all of that we experienced starting whatever, 30, 40 years ago. Well, thank you for investing your time with us today, Josh. I want to say thank you also to everyone that joined our session. And I'll wrap up by saying, make it a more productive day today.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for having me on.
Bye now.